Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Samantha Shokin. I am the manager of public programs at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City. I'm pleased to welcome you today to our very special commemorative event in commemoration of the MS St. Louis. So to just give a brief overview, in May of 1939, the German ocean liner, the MS St. Louis, set out on a transatlantic voyage toward Havana, Cuba, with 937 passengers, most of them Jewish refugees fleeing the Nazi regime. After the arduous journey, the ship was denied access to Cuba upon arrival. After 4 days of negotiations, only 28 passengers were allowed to disembark, while the rest ordered to remain on board and the ship to sail away. The ship's captain, Gustav Schroeder, did his best to find a non-German port, but was turned away by the United States before Great Britain, France, Belgium, and Holland granted some of his passengers political asylum. After the Nazis swept through Europe, beginning in September of that year, many of the refugees from the St. Louis were eventually exterminated in Nazi concentration camps. Only the 287 who were taken in by Great Britain were spared. In recent years, the United States government has acknowledged its mistakes and expressed deep regret for not aiding the St. Louis refugees. So with us today to speak about this very important subject is award-winning journalist and author Armando Lucas Correa, an expert on the St. Louis and editor-in-chief of People en Español. Armando's first novel, the international bestseller, The German Girl, is based on the true story of the St. Louis and dedicated to both the victims and survivors of the ill-fated voyage. Interviewing Armando today is Jessica Shaw, host of EW Live, a daily live show with interviews and discussions about pop culture on Sirius XM radio. Jessica grew up hearing the stories of her father's escape from Paris as a child during the Holocaust and how he was one of the lucky ones who made it to Cuba, where he grew up speaking Yiddish before coming to the United States. So welcome, Armando and Jessica. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Samantha. And I just want to say we're seeing on the chat box about where so many people are from, and it is so moving both to me and I know to Armando as well to have people from all over the United States and Israel and Brazil and Canada and Turkey and people who have a connection to survivors. It's really, especially in this time when I think so many of us feel disconnected, I know being able to be here and talk about this piece of history is very moving to me. And just Armando, I have so many questions for you because you did such extraordinary, extensive research for your book, The German Girl. But first and foremost, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So, Armando's extraordinary book, The German Girl, is it tells the story, really tells two stories, but the main story is about this young girl named Hannah in Germany in 1939, which, as Samantha said, was the year that the St. Louis left Hamburg, destined for Cuba, where the assumption was that many lives would be saved, the lives of a boat filled with, the ship filled with mostly Jewish refugees. Armando, what was it about this topic that interested you?
The first time that I heard about the St. Louis, I think I was around 10 years old. I am Cuban. I was born in Cuba. And my grandmother, for my mother's side, she's the daughter of a Spanish immigrant. They arrived in Cuba around the beginning of the 20th century. She was pregnant with my mom when the boat arrived in Havana, 1939. And I remember growing up during the 70s and 80s in Cuba, and my grandmother saying, Cuba is gonna pay very dearly because what they did to the Jewish refugees. And fighting with my grandfather, saying it was because of Batista, it was, talking about politics. And then when I went to college and trying to figure out what happened with the St. Louis, what is the St. Louis? And, nobody knew. I have access in Cuba, it's very limited, the access to information. And I went to the National Archive because I was working in my thesis for for college, nothing related to the St. Louis. And I asked the librarian, do you have anything related to the St. Louis here? And in Cuba, everything is whispering. And then she said, oh, Armando, we used to have like a big boxes, like 3 of them, labeled with the St. Louis, and all of them disappeared during the 70s. For me, you know, the curiosity was bigger. I arrived in the United States in 1991, working for the Herald as a journalist. And then I started collecting and reading and buying even books in language that I don't read. I have like a small museum for the St. Louis. And because I'm a journalist, I was thinking, well, maybe I'm gonna do like a nonfiction book. I'm gonna interview all the survivors that I can have access to them, maybe some historian. But then I became a father in 2005 and everything changed. You know, I want to create a book since the point of view of a little girl. And I remember, I don't know if some of you read the book, but the first sentence is something like, I'm gonna be 12 years old and I decided to kill my parent. At the beginning, it was 9 years old, 10 years old, because Anna and Hannah, you know, they grew up like Emma, my daughter. And when I publish the book, Emma is gonna be 12 years old.
So tell me about, so you decided you want to write this. It's so interesting to me that you had this consciousness from being a small boy of what had been mentioned to you by your family. So you already had a connection and relationship, but tell me about the research that you ultimately did, because it was extensive. And I think the book is a book of historical fiction, but the details in it are so specific and so rich that it's very obvious that you did a tremendous amount of research.
Yeah, you know, I think it was part of my obsession when I'm working on something, and this is the side of the journalist that I have, and then I want to be accurate, and at the same time I want to be creative because I'm, you know, working on a novel. And you want me to show right now all the stuff that I have collected, or yeah? Okay. Let me put it here.
And maybe before you start showing it, tell us the different places that you reached out to. I assume those 3 boxes in the National Archives were never found or recovered, but you did such extensive research at other places. So maybe can you tell us some of the places?
You know, at the beginning, it was everything that I can buy, you know, everything that is accessed via some weird auction houses online. And some of them, they are really weird. But, you know, I need all the stuff that for example, I bought the postcard from the St. Louis, and this is some of the document, like the ticket for the passenger. This is part of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. They have most of, you know, they have a lot of original document. And this is a letter that I found when I visit one of the survivors in Toronto, Canada, Anna Maria Carmen Gordon, and that is her last name right now. And, you know, you can see that the director of immigration in Cuba allowed them to disembark. This is a letter in Spanish from them. And for me, it was like very exciting when I visited her, because I found her via her daughter. Her daughter, I met her in Cuba during the 80s. She's an artist, a Mexican. And when I posted like a day like tomorrow, you know, it's the anniversary of the St. Louis, like 7 or 8 years ago. And he said, well, a day like today, this happened. And then this woman from Mexico posted, oh, Armando, I think my mother was on that boat. He said, Sylvia, please give me the last name because I have the manifesto of the boat. It took like 2 weeks to answer my message. And then I asked her, where is your mother living now? Toronto. I took a flight the next day, and she's one of my best friends right now. And when I visited her, she have all, you know, like a shoe boxes with a lot of documents from the St. Louis. I bought this 10 Reichmark, you know, because Hitler allowed them only to carry 10 Reichmark per passenger. You have a question, I think.
Yes, it was actually about the last screen, but you can stay on this one too, because it's linked. You know, it was interesting to see the Director General of Immigration had issued those visas, which is, maybe you can talk about that a little bit, because these people, they were issued visas. And then just about a week before the St. Louis left its port in Hamburg, the president of Cuba issued a decree like you have here. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, we're talking about May 1939. At that moment, most of these passengers, and some of them, let's say, they wait until the last minute to leave Germany. Maybe, I talked to some of the survivors and they said, maybe my family thought that maybe because they have money, they can, survive Hitler, it's 1939, but it's actually after the Crystal Nash. And then the only country giving visas or permit of disembark, let's be more precise, it was Cuba. Because, Palestine at that moment, under the control of Great Britain, it was full. And some of them, they have visas to go to United States and Canada, but, the waiting list maybe is between 1 to 5 years. Then Cuba, it was the paradise at that moment. But what happened? They pay $150 for the permit and signed by Manuel Benitez, the director of immigration. And the president signed this decree a couple of days before the boat left Hamburg. This is some of the,
Can you just maybe put that in the context of what was going on in Cuba at that point? Obviously, there was a tremendous amount of xenophobia, and what was the reasoning given that the visas were issued, and then that the president would say, no, these are actually null and void?
Okay, to have an idea, Cuba is a country of immigrants. We have people from Spain, from Africa, China, Haiti. There's a lot of people, Jamaica, because it's close to the Venezuela, and it's like a country like that. But most of them, they were from Spain, before during the war, independence war. And before the boat arrived, one of the ex-president of Cuba organized one of the biggest, protests with the motto that Cuba for the Cubans, And I think when my grandmother, she's the daughter of a Spanish immigrant, watching what is happening, it was like 40,000 people on the street. And it was very traumatic for her. She was a young girl at that moment. And then seeing what happened with the St. Louis. And they have like a two power, Federico Laredo is the president, but we have the chief of army, that is Batista. He's gonna be the president like a couple of years later. And then he's the man with power in the country. What happened when the boat arrived? Batista was sick. He has like a kind of flu. And even he can answer the phone. And he's a great politician. He doesn't want be part, I think, of this tragedy. And, and he woke up the day after the boat left, June 2nd. He's the kind of guy that he did like, like Poncio Pilatos washing his hand. And, this is not my problem. This is a problem of Laredo Bru, and part of the history is going to be with him. Because, later he opened the doors to the Jewish refugees. I'm talking about during the 40s. Many years later, I think your father arrived around that time too.
Yeah, just to this story of the St. Louis has always felt very meaningful to me. My father was not on the St. Louis, but he was born in Paris, and his family escaped over the Pyrenees, and they got onto a boat, and their boat was actually torpedoed by the Nazis, and it had to stop in Tenerife. Ultimately, they did make it to Cuba. My grandparents had legal visas to Cuba, and they had illegal visas to the United States, and which I understand was a relatively common thing. A lot of the people, even on the St. Louis and on other boats that went to Havana, that maybe the ultimate goal was to get to the United States, and they wanted to stop in Havana. My father, the boat, I don't know the name of the ship, which is, I feel like is in those 3 boxes that you came across in Cuba. But his family was allowed to get off of the ship in Havana, and he grew up there, and then he ultimately came to America on a ship called the Florida several years later.
Yeah. You can see here, the real German girls and people from the St. Louis. This is a part of the boat, the real girls and boys. And this is the image of the boat arriving May 27, 1939 in Havana. Some of them, they didn't know that they were not allowed to disembark. They prepared the luggage even. they dress like a very fancy to go out of the boat. And then some of the family of the passenger, they rent a boat to be close to the boat, and they were screaming the last name to find out which one was there or not. So only 28 passengers disembarked.
Right, 22 of them were Jews, right?
Exactly, yeah. And this is, you know, most of the newspaper that was against all these refugees, because, you know, they were living in Europe. They don't have an other option. And it was really sad reading all the newspaper, even the New York Times at that moment. This is one of the letter that is to in the Holocaust Museum. This Lauren Berenson, it was the guy doing all the negotiation. It was, you know, he fight for all these people with the President Laredo in Havana. And when he asked for a discount, because, you know, Laredo Blue requested $500 per passenger to disembark. That was a fortune at that moment. He requested a discount, and, you know, immediately he said that the boat has to leave Havana June 2nd in the morning. It was a really, really sad morning. I remember, you know, walking around Malecon, you know, close to the harbor in the Vedado when I was a child with my grandmother, and she's saying that here was the biggest boat, you know, and you know, she was very dramatic. My grandmother was like a crazy old lady, but I love her because, you know, she passed this story to me. The boat arrived in Miami. One of the survivors, Herbert Colliner, he's alive. He's living in Ventura in Miami. He was 13 years old. And he remembered when he told me that when the boat arrived in Miami and he saw the skyline, he said to his father, "No, Dad, I want to live in Miami, not in Cuba." You know, they returned to Paris. You know, they went to France. They ended in the orphanage in the non-occupied zone in France, and the father, mother, and sister, they went killed in Auschwitz. Right. And then he ended in Florida. He married. He have a beautiful family, and he's still alive. And, you know, they were rejected by the United States, in that case, Roosevelt and Mackenzie, the Prime Minister in Canada too.
Yeah, I wanted to pause on that for one second. I came across a quote that the immigration minister of Canada said that is so devastating, and I think that we can talk later in this talk, Armando, about how this story is so important today, and it's so important how we learn from history. But this quote that the immigration minister of Canada said, if these Jews were to find a home in Canada, they would be followed by other shiploads. The line must be drawn somewhere.
Oh, yeah, it's devastating. And if you go to the Roosevelt Library, they said, we never send them back to Germany. And that was not true. That was not true because, you know, they found when they were in the middle of the ocean coming back to Europe, it was that moment when they found that France is gonna receive 224, Great Britain 287, Belgium 214, Poland 181. So it was in the middle of the ocean. When Roosevelt and Mackenzie said no to them, they sent them back to Germany. That's a reality, yeah. Right. This is, you know, the famous Gustav Schroeder, and I read a lot about him. I talked to the survivor about him because, you know, then he was a Nazi, he was a German, but he was like an old captain, you know, with all this ethic. And for him, the most important part, it was the passengers. And I think we have some of the question if they can practice their religion there, and he allowed that. You know, even in one of the big salon of the boat, he removed the Hitler, you know, portrait, and they can celebrate Shabbat there. I bought, this is one of the precious things that I bought. It was his diary and signed by him. I donated to the small Holocaust Museum in Havana. They have a Holocaust Museum in Havana, very small. And then I donated to them. But, you know, when I got it in an auction, I feel like I won the lottery. And this is the sad part. It was in 2009 that Obama, President Obama recognized what we did to these Jewish refugees and invited them to the Congress. In Canada, in 2011, they built some kind of monument. Until today, we're waiting for Cuba. But because I think I feel really proud about this, because the first country that the German girl was a bestseller was Canada. And then because we have a survivor of the St. Louis that she's a Canadian citizen, the one that I call her the Mexican one, because she went to Holland, they survived Ravensburg and Buchenwald, her father, they ended in Mexico, and she married in Mexico, had their children, and now she's living in Canada. The last year, I think it was in December, I helped the office of the Prime Minister to invite all, like 7 children from the St. Louis, and he did a kind of apology in the House of Commons. And, being there with all these children that, they're really old today, it was very emotional for me.
I want to just point out, I'm seeing so many of you are commenting on the chat link, and if you want to weigh in, you can kind of click on that little chat button on the bottom of your screen and have questions. We're definitely going to get to questions for Armando, but I want to say something that just moved me so, and you talked about Armando being in the presence of some of the children of the survivors, and someone who is listening right now, Richard Stein, said, my dad is the third boy from the left kneeling, which was from a few slides ago. There was a picture of kids, and Richard, thank you so much for telling us that, and it's so moving to hear that, and we're so honored that you are here.
You can see this is a part of the research. My research was a little weird because I went to all these places when I finished the book, because I wanted that the book sounds like a fairy tale from the voice of a girl, and I want to control the journalist that I have in me. And then when I finished the book, I went to Auschwitz. This is the yellow house is with a lot of window. This is the house for Leo, and the yellow house on the corner on the left. This is my house in Havana, and is the house for Hannah in Verado, and that's the point when the boat left. And I am a little crazy. On May 13 at 8 p.m. in 2014, I took a boat there. And then, I didn't went to Cuba, but I was around the harbor and I was crying. The people thought that I was drunk, because for me, it was important to take the boat that moment and close like a chapter when I finished the book.
Absolutely.
This is the Berlin 1939 from the first part of the book. And this is the Havana that, my character Hannah and Alma have to confront again, And the reason that the book is called The German Girl is because there was this magazine, and if you were a teenager in Berlin 1939, you were subscribed to this magazine. And they put always the perfect people, the Aryan people, white, blue eyes, strong women. And one day they took a picture from the street. They thought it was like a perfect Aryan German girl, and she was a Jewish girl. And I built the story around that. This is Herbert Colliner, who is his father, the guy that he was 13 years old at the boat. And this is Herbert now in his apartment when I interviewed him for the book. Yeah. And this is one of my favorite. I think maybe she's online because I invited her. And this is Judith. Right now, she's Judith Steele. She's got a Judith couple. And she was with her grandfather, father, and mother. She was 14 months old. And they was sent back to France, and the father saved her because he had changed her with jewelry with a farmer, and the whole family were killed in Auschwitz. This is Judith today in her apartment in Kew Garden, and he's one of the lovely girls that she's always with me when I presented the book in New York. And this is Ana Maria, the Mexican one that I call her, and her mother, she was 4 years old, and now she's living in Toronto. This is the day that I met her. This is one of my favorite. I went to her with her to the Auschwitz exposition that they have in the Holocaust in the Museum of Heritage in New York. We went together. She was, I think, like 9 months old on the boat with her father and mother, and they were the lucky one. And her father, when he had to decide which country they're gonna go, he said, I want to go to one that is separated with water from Germany. And they went to the Great Britain and they survived. She's like a really small old lady, strong old lady, and she's traveling around the country with all the original documents talking about the St. Louis. Yeah. And of course, I presented the book, my book, the German girl, the daughter and her synagogue, and they have like a big book club in New Jersey. This is another one that I found. I presented the book in Connecticut, and I found Sonia. Sonia, another survivor of the St. Louis. This is the manifesto of the boat. I remember when I have access to all these original documents at the Holocaust Museum, Washington, D.C., and I can have all this paper in my hand. I spend the whole day and taking note and cry a lot. After I became a father, I cried. You can tell me the story right now, I can start crying immediately. And this is my grandmother. I always finish this presentation with a picture of my grandmother because, because of her, I have been writing all these 3 books in a way, Let me show the small picture. I think it's this one, the video with the boat arriving.
While you're looking for that, I want to just say, I love that you ended the slideshow with the picture of your grandmother and the importance of people bearing witness and of people not saying, oh, this is a, an ugly part of our history, so we're not going to talk about it, but saying, no, you must talk about it, and telling her grandson, this is really important for you to know.
I think so. Yeah, I understand, because I remember when I have access to the phones and email from all these survivors, like 13 of them, some of them, they didn't want to talk about it. I understand it was too painful. They lost everybody. But for me, I think this is something that I talk to my children, and they know about the Holocaust, and they know about everything, and they read my book. This is, here you can see one of the survivors, yeah. And we have sound, I hope. I don't know how to put the sound, but.
Armando, maybe you could try exiting the PowerPoint and playing the video, because we're still, oh, there it is. Okay, great.
Okay.
Try pulling up the video and sharing your screen once more.
Okay, let me do it again. Sorry. Okay.
We're all learning Zoom, Armando. Listen.
There is no sound, but maybe it's because of me.
Very hard to be a refugee.
Oh yeah, you can.
And an immigrant.
Yeah.
Can you share your screen again?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm glad that Armando wrote this book, because
okay, but we have sound now.
People tend to forget.
Give me one second.
We should not forget the mistakes of history.
Okay. Again.
It was okay until the Germans came in. It's very hard to be
we're still not seeing the video, but I can try playing it on my screen if that's easier.
I'm
sorry.
People tend to forget. And we should
there it is. Now we see it.
Okay, I'm sorry. I can put it again. It's like a really short video. Okay, now.
It was okay until the Germans came in. It's very hard to be a refugee and an immigrant anywhere you go. I'm glad that Armando wrote this book, because people tend to forget. And we should not forget the mistakes of history.
Okay, how can I, okay, stop here. Close
Just close
here.
out of that. There you go.
Now. we're back now.
I mean, it's the research that you did is fascinating. All the photos and the manifest and all of those things. Armando, I was wondering if you could describe what the ship was like. You write about this in your book in The German Girl, and like you said, Captain Schroeder, he, I've read that he covered. There was the ship sailed under the Nazi flag. But he made a point to cover up. There was a bust of Hitler. He covered it up with a cloth. And it was important to him that the people on the ship, most of whom were Jewish refugees, it was important to him that they have an experience with fancy dinners and with performances. And can you talk a little bit about what actual...
To be in context, you have to have an idea. This is exactly after Kristallnacht. So they lost all these Jews from Germany. They lost their rights. They cannot buy the paper. They cannot sit in the same bench on the park. They cannot take the train. So they have a very limited life at that moment. They were losing everything. And then when they took and some of them, they're rich. Some of them, they were very rich. And then when they go in the boat, the life went back. And Hitler, that's the irony, there was only 10 Reichsmark per person, but they can bring their jewelry, their clothes. Some of the tickets that I have from the boat, they have 13 luggages to one family, and then they enjoy the life at the boat. And a couple of people from the boat, they were very nasty, the young people, but the captain in general, he was very nice to all of them. And it was like a huge experience from all these people. I remember, because I talked to some of the survivors, that they say, I remember they used to have like a small dog, one of the families, that it was not dog in the St. Louis, for sure.
What do you know about the captain? Because certainly to have made that a priority, and certainly he has been honored by Yad Vashem among others, but you made it a priority these people deserve to have safe refuge. What do we know about him?
Okay, if you are to have an idea, if you were a German at that moment working and captain of the boat, you have to be a member of the party. I think all of the the people working on the boat, they were Nazis. That's for sure. But what happened with the captain? It was like an old school captain, and that mentality, it was unique. And helpful for all these passengers. When they return, even they fight with all these, the group that, organized, and they have all the information, and he shared the cable with all these father of the men that were in the boat. It was like a small committee working. What are we gonna do? We have to send some, the cable to find out what's gonna happen, because he knew that he sent them back to Germany, they're gonna be killed, all of them. After, after the travel to Cuba, the St. Louis did a couple of trips again, and during the war, the boat, it was destroyed, during the bombs. The captain, they were taken to trial because he was a Nazi, and some of the survivors organized and sent letters to the trial and to the judge saying that this guy helped them. And some of the survivors, I don't know, because this is a little private, he helped them and paid the rent during the 50s in Hamburg. And in this case, Herbert traveled to Hamburg to find out if he has any survivors, the captain. And then he found out the hat of the captain, and I think it was the nephew, sent it to him. And right now the hat is in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Wow. And I think recently, like a couple of years ago, appeared another family with a box of letters from the captain. And you know that he said, I never can pronounce that word. This is righteous among the nation. No, he said, and when I went to the Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, I found the tree. It was very emotional for me too. And I read his name in one of the big walls with all the name.
When I was so interested to say, when you were talking earlier in your slideshow that you you bought his book in an auction, his memoir. What did you learn when you read that? Was there anything
No, I read the book before because the book is in German, and then it's a small book. When I bought it, it was like an object. It's something that it was in his hand, because I think it was only 100 copies. Herbert Carling has one of the original copy. And then when I was in the auction, this person said, it's signed by him. And he said, I want this copy, because later I bought another one without his signature. And I have it with me because I don't know, when you are writing, you need all this stuff, and maybe you're never gonna use it. And when I bought another thing that in one of these weird site that is like when you put the cyanide, the bronze capsule, and I want one that it said 1939 Hamburg. And then someone said, okay, we have a couple of them, one of them with a swastika, and okay, I bought it, I have it, I donated to the Holocaust Museum in Havana, and then this guy is sending email. It was a Nazi, sending email. Okay, I have the cyclone, the box, and I have this. Okay, I think you are making a mistake with me. I am bought this because
you're like, we're not on the same page.
But I am not that kind of guy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like cut off communication. What you did so much research, like we just saw. Was there anything that surprised you that you found out that you thought, oh, that's not how I thought that might have happened?
Yeah, when you are reading about all these people, and it was different. There was the people in first class and the people it was in coach, or I don't know how it's called, on the boat, but when you realize I think I changed my character, Alma, the mother, because at the beginning, I thought all these people that were suffering, and when I find out that most of these women, they live like a very, unique life. And when I talked to one of the survivors, she said to me, this, in the case of Alma, the character I is building up, the original one, is that she was blonde, she was blue-eyed, she was tall, skinny, and rich. And then she thought, and she was Jewish, of course, but they were more German than Jewish at that moment, because she's like a third generation and they thought that because they own the building and they have the money and they look different to the rest of the Jews, they can survive Hitler, And then when you talk to the survivor of this family, it's shocking, because you don't understand the kind of mind that is working, in more in a society when the exterior and the color of your skin and the size of or your nose or your head, they take inside and measuring your body, because this obsession for the Nazis that everybody has to look the same. And I changed the book completely when I read and I talked to these survivors. And at the end, I remember when I presented the book in Australia, everybody trying to say, because the book was out when all these Syrian refugees, walking around Europe trying to find a country, that I wrote the book because of that. And I explained to them, no, it's fine that you can find a connection with that something that is happening now. But, this story has been with me since I was a child. But at the end, when I finished The Daughter Cell, I realized that I'm writing a book about the fear that we have of the other one. We are always afraid of people who has a different skin color, or people who has a different accent like me, or people who has a different sexual orientation. And you want that your children marry people like you, and I don't know if I can say that, but when I bought my apartment in New York in a co-op, I don't know, this is a crazy thing to have a co-op. I was the first Hispanic family buying a co-op from 1925, and we need to understand that we are different and we have to respect our differences. And the day that we respect our differences, the world is going to be better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said that. We're going to take questions in just a couple of minutes, but it's, you know, the story is it is both specific and unique to the people on the St. Louis, and of course, like you said so beautifully, the story of intolerance and bigotry and persecution, unfortunately, is something that has continued and that does continue when people don't learn from history. I wonder if we can, Samantha, get to some of the questions. I see there are so many of them.
Have a lot of comments, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We have a lot of questions, so I and Jessica, we will do our best to sort of bunch together similar themes that we find. So here's a couple of questions that I received in advance of this presentation. This question comes from Ines. She says, I've read that the crew of the St. Louis made some accommodations to allow the passengers the ability to observe their faith while on board. Do you know anything about this? Can you elaborate?
I explained that. Yeah, they celebrate one Shabbat, and in the main room, the captain removed the Hitler portrait to celebrate the Shabbat with them. Yeah, and there is another anecdote that you know that some of the people who work, the young people who work on the boat, they left newspaper against the Jews. You know, because at that moment in all the newspaper in Germany, they said they stole our masterpieces from the museum. They stole our money. They are raping their children, and they have all the newspaper on the room in the cafeteria, I remember. And then the captain said, you have to remove all this newspaper and remove the Hitler portrait because they're going to celebrate Shabbat. Yeah.
You know, I just want to follow up with that. Someone else, Ed and Estelle Cohen, asked about who the passengers were, because you did mention Armando earlier that this was, I mean, it was May 13th, 1939. So that's what, you know, several months after Kristallnacht, like you said. Who were these people? And you said there were, you know, people went on with 13 pieces of luggage. Was it the people who bought these tickets, mostly German Jews, but there were Jews from elsewhere as well? Were they, was the group of people on the ship particularly affluent?
Okay, if you talk to some of them, they said that they were like a middle class, but you know, they have to pay over 900 Reichsmark per ticket. That's, you know, at that moment, that was a fortune. Some of them, they sold their properties and the businesses, like Herbert Kalliner. They have like a small business. And some of them, if you talk to Ana Maria, he said, because I love to present it, she's the real German girl. He said, I am not German. You know, I am from this small town that once belonged to Germany and now belong to, you know, Czechoslovakia or whatever. And you talk to Judith lives, you know, in Mitte, in the center of Berlin. She's the classic German girl. But they're you know, they're people, like they say, upper class. Some of them, not all of them, yeah.
It was also very interesting. There's a moment in the book that I found very, very moving when you know, without spoiling to the mom at one point says, I'm not going to speak German anymore. You know, when I get off, this is, you know, and it just, it spoke to that sense of betrayal that you know, obviously this is historical fiction, but that I imagine when you spoke to survivors that they felt as well.
And to have an idea, even, you know, I don't know if most of you know that I am not Jewish, that, you know, this is not part of my story. I heard the story when I was a child, but you can find my grandmother, and, you know, she gave voice to Alma when she said, Cuba is going to pay very dearly for the 100 years. No? And the phrase about German is Ana Maria Carmen, one of the survivors. You know, even today she speaks German. And when I published the book in Germany, and the editor said, oh, can Ana Maria, you know, can we have a video with her talking about the German girl in German? And I said, I'm gonna try, you know. But, you know, she said, I'm never gonna speak German again. And the family thought like that. And she, you know, even today, because of the book, when he was published in Holland, and they found out a photographer that shoot all these refugees when they arrived in Holland. And then there were, you know, girls and really little girls. And then I put in contact with her. And the funny thing is, one of the women living in, I think it was in Belgium, and Ana Maria in Toronto, they taught Dutch between them. And Ana Maria told me, I never taught, you know, spoke Dutch after I left the concentration camp. Never. And, you know, the mind is a surprise. And then, you know, Ana Maria, we take the video talking in German, you know, and about the book for my editors and the readers in Germany.
Go ahead, Samantha.
Thanks. There are a bunch of questions here about sort of if there was a public outcry, maybe from the Jewish American community after the passengers were denied entry.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Was there any sort of public outcry from the American Jewish community after?
Yeah, the United States, it was very complicated at that moment. Think about it, it was 1939, but it's 10 years after the crack. And the anti-Semitism in the government, it was, you know, it was real. It's nothing, because I know that if you go to the Roosevelt Library, they don't want to say that, you know, the government was anti-Semitism. But, you know, I have all the conversation between the president of the Department of State of the United States and the Cuban government. And, you know, and they said, please don't accept more Jewish from Europe, because all of them, they want to come to United States, and we can't accept all the refugees. Now, this is part of the conversation between the Department of State and the government. That's real. I have all these documents, you know, and I understand that that's happened all the time, that this is 1939, is a couple of months before the war, but they're human beings.
Yeah.
Right.
And then when you see in paper the reality, because, you know, okay, there were anti-Semitism, but, you know, it was real, it was documented. The Jewish community only have, and I know when I said the number, it sounds like it's a lot of money, but they only have $2 million to help 15 million Jewish from Europe. They can't spend the 2 million in the 937 or whatever refugees arriving in Cuba, you know, paying the $500 per passenger. It was impossible to pay that. He got from a bank a check from, I think, around $60,000 or $50,000. That was a fortune at that moment, and the president of Cuba rejected the check.
Right. And at the time, I believe there were, you know, in the press, there were several op-ed pieces calling on the government in different countries to accept the refugees. But yeah, like you said, you know, FDR basically said, there's already a wait list, and these people, just because they are on this ship, that doesn't mean that they can, quote unquote, cut the line. They need to go back and wait in line and you know, fill those quotas that we had already established. And he essentially, along with other people, sent people to their deaths.
And just as a follow-up to that question, what was the reason for allowing those 28 passengers who disembarked in Cuba?
That's a good question. Yeah, you know, the president said that he's only going to accept passenger. And remember, there were six of them that were not Jewish. It was Cuban and Spanish, and the rest, they were Jewish. I think a couple of them, they paid the $500 because they have family with money waiting for them. I think it was a couple of them. There was a girl, nobody knew exactly what happened. And the rest, they have the permit of disembark from the Department of Labor in Cuba. And they accepted from the Department of Labor because they have to say, you are allowed to disembark in Havana, but you are not allowed to work. If you have that permit, not that, because, you know, all the permit from the Manuel Benitez, from the Department of Immigration, it was via HAPAC, you know, the company who owned the St. Louis. But you requested via the embassy in Germany and signed by the Department of Labor, you were allowed to disembark. It was like a 22 has that permit, yeah.
I'm curious if you know anything about the other ships that ultimately because there were some other ones that went from Europe to Cuba. What do you know about the follow-up ship?
At the same time, when the boat was arriving, the cable, it was communicating between different boats, that they said you have to move because they are not accepting any boat. They went to Venezuela. But you know what is the difference? All these boats, it was only with 40, 60 people. The biggest one, it was with 60 people. The St. Louis, it was over 900 people. That's the difference between all these. At that moment, 1939, Venezuela, Peru accepted a couple of boats, and Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic, Trujillo was at the moment at the power, and he was a racist. And he said, okay, because they were killing all the Asians, from Haiti, and they want more white people to clean the race in Dominican Republic. And then they want all these Jews from Europe, but they have to pay them $500. I always say, okay, I know it sounds cruel and it sounds like they have to pay, but they say the lie. I don't care whatever, Trujillo was in his mind, but he saved a lot of life accepting all these Jewish refugees from Europe.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple questions here about sort of like the other countries that could have been destinations for the passengers. So the first question comes from Mike. Why Cuba? Why did they not try to go to other Central American countries with large Jewish populations? And the next question from Anthony. For those that ended up in Britain, do you know anything about the criteria that the British used to decide which refugees they would accept?
Yeah. You have to think about it. It's May 1939 when the boat left. We're talking about the visa or permit of disembark process from January, February, and March. It's after Kristallnacht. In May, all the visas and permit of disembark around the world, they were full. Palestina, it was full. Argentina, it was 1,000. United States was 24,000. It was, already taken. The only country making money and accepting Jews, it was Cuba at that moment. The only one in May 1939. It was a moment of desperation for all the refugees living in Berlin. And that's the reason. What is the other part of the question?
Yeah. The other question was, what were some of the criteria that other countries?
Great Britain, yeah. The committee, it was, they said, okay, we have 900. They discussed, and they didn't pay. They don't have to pay the $500 per passenger. Some of them went to a provisional camp in France, for example, and then they were relocated. But it was decided. Great Britain was the one who accepted more refugees, France too. But let me tell you, most of these people from the boat, they want to go to France. That was the country that they want. I don't know why, but this is another thing that I learned, that most of the Jews in Germany, they were Franco. They speak French, and they learn French, and they love French culture, and they read a lot of, and then that's the reason that most of them, they want to go to France. And France has a big Jewish community too at that moment, The problem was in September, the war started, that was the big difference.
Right, that's so interesting to me that so many of them wanted to go to France. I think about, at that point, my father was born and living in Paris, and then what would ultimately happen to those who went to France. And I think a few people did ask about, saying that these people were not technically sent back to Germany, but when they did go to Western Europe, and when the Nazis annexed those areas, they were essentially sent back under, to the Nazi rule.
And another thing, there is a lot of pictures of all these consulate and embassy and the Palestinians that were destroyed because they knew, after Kristallnacht, they destroyed the front of the buildings because they knew that they were processing Jewish to leave the country. And if you want to apply in Palestine at that moment, and the office from Great Britain that they have in the middle of Berlin, it was like scary because you can be attacked. Right. This is a real complicated part of history because you are not in the middle of the war, but the Nazis in power and they don't want any Jews.
We have just a couple more questions about just to, if you can elaborate on what specific criteria there were. Was there like a, need for them to be affluent or educated or anything?
For the countries that were accepted, no.
Yeah, nothing?
No, some of them, it was like a decided on the boat. There was like a small committee that it was like a 6 men, I think, that one of the pictures you can see all of them. And, if you knew the language, you can say, okay, I know English, I can go to Perpita. But most of them, the only language that I speak, it was French. Yeah.
Can you also tell us how, this is a question from Yvonne, how were German Jews treated in Cuba? Did most leave after the war, or did they enjoy their lives there and decide to stay?
No, they, when they arrived, this is another thing that I use on the book, that, all the Jewish from Europe, they were called, even from the Sephardi from Spain, they were called Polacos.
Mm-hmm.
In Cuba, all the Jewish people, they were Polacos, like all the Asian people, they were Chinese, and all the people from Spain, even if you are Catalan or Basque, you were Gallegos, that's part of the story. But, I
just want to add to, I can confirm that, because I can tell you that on the ship, on the manifest, when my father and his family went from Cuba to America, that's how they were designated. And I remember asking my brother, why that? Why are they calling? He said, that's just how the Cubans are to do.
For all the Jewish people, they're Polak, and they build their life, and I think that the community was huge at that moment. Cuba is a country of 10 million people, and the community at that moment was 50,000, and they were, they built their business, and then in 1959. The revolution came. They when at the end of the war, they stay in Cuba, and they want to keep their life in Cuba. They don't try to go to the United States. They have their business, and then in 1959, they lost all the property. It was a different. I'm not comparing Hitler to Fidel Castro, because it's not comparable. It's something completely different. But they lost the business. So all the business belonged to the government. You lose all the property, you only keep the house that you're living, and then after, coming from Europe and building your business, your factory, whatever you have, and then you are losing again because of the government. And the other problem that they have is you are Jewish, because in Cuba, you don't have a problem from the skin color or your last name. The problem is your mind. You have a religion and you believe in God. That was the problem. They closed all the synagogues. Okay, I don't care if you are Jewish, you cannot practice your religion. That's the problem. Even until today, they don't have a rabbi in Cuba. The community is small, they are like 2,000, and they import the rabbi from Panama, Mexico. And when I went to Jerusalem, I talked to a guy who was spent 2 years negotiating with the government to allow an Orthodox rabbi in Havana. And after 2 years, they never say no, but they were never allowed. They say Cuba is never going to say no. You are losing your time, but they're never going to allow an Orthodox rabbi in Havana.
I'm curious, Armando, if you know today how it's so interesting, and certainly so much has been written about the education system and how we now teach different things from different perspectives to children growing up now. What is the education in Cuba now for kids about the St. Louis? How is it taught, or is it taught?
No, they don't talk about it. The story is funny because, when I left my country in 1991, I working with the Herald, they hate journalists, and trying to go when the first Pope visited Cuba, John Paul. I was part of the journalists visiting, and they returned me in the same plane, and I put Cuba on the side. For me, Cuba is like a nightmare. And then when Obama opened the diplomatic relationship, they create the first delegation of editors and publishers from America going to Cuba. Because my book, it was in print at that moment, it was not published, but because I am the editor of People in Espanol, and the publisher, they invite us to go with all these important people for the publishing houses in United States. Okay, I arrived in Cuba. For me, it was very emotional. I went to El Morro. I can see the Havana from the same point of view that the San Luis. There was the book fair, and I met these people from a synagogue that they have been fighting for years to take him back to them. It was from her grandfather, and then with the help of the government of Israel and Steven Spielberg, the movie director, they get the synagogue back only for cultural reason, for the holidays and that kind of thing. And in the top of the first floor, they have like a theater performance and some kind of thing, rehearsal. And then another fight for another 2 years to getting back to create like the Holocaust Museum, with the only condition that they have to say that Cuba always helped the Jewish refugees. And then they create, Spielberg donate, Spielberg interview all of the Holocaust survivors. They have this video, and he donated the screen with the videos, and they put an image of the St. Louis without caption. When I saw that, I said, okay, next year I'm coming back with 100 copies of The German Girl, and I'm gonna donate all my, all the diary, the pictures, original document that I have. I'm gonna donate it because this Cuba is part of the tragedy. The next generation have to know what happened exactly. Okay, next year I went with the president of my editorial house, my editors, the whole delegation. We arrived in Cuba, and then and they spent like a 25,000 euro building all the stand in the book fair. When we arrived, no books allowed to enter in Cuba. They were all detained and customed. I said, oh my God, my paranoia, this is because of the German Girl. Okay, they said, no, tomorrow, like they say in San Luis, no, tomorrow you're gonna find a solution. Herbert Kaliner said the first word that he learned in Spanish was mañana, tomorrow, because in Cuba, they said tomorrow, they're gonna resolve everything. I said, okay, tomorrow is Sunday, you're never gonna get back the book Sunday. And then Monday, we got all the books, but not the German Girl. And they said that they have to eliminate the part of the presentation of the German Girl. And I want to present my book at the synagogue. This woman invited like over 300 people from the community, the ambassador of Canada, all the countries implied, and the Holland, and CNN, Reuters, AP. And I said, okay, I'm leaving next day, but you'll stay here. I don't want any problem. So no, Armando, don't worry. Nobody called me. I invited everybody. You are going to do your presentation on the kind that I've seen that you saw here. I presented there in Spanish. And then the next day, she was pale when I arrived to the synagogue. I said, they called you? Oh, of course they called me. They said that if I want to do a presentation, I need a religious visa. And he said, she's a Jewish Cuban who talked like this with all the hands. And she said, okay, he's not a rabbi, he's a writer, and he's gonna do a donation. If you want to cancel, bring the police and cancel. But, I invited all the ambassadors and all the, the press accredited in Cuba. When I arrived, my mother texted me, please don't be alone in the street. These people are crazy. Then I presented saying, I am not a rabbi. I'm here to donate and talk about, the part of the history of our country that I think everybody has to learn. I did the donation, I left, and I put Cuba against on the side because for me, it was really, really straightforward. They kept the 100,000 copies. They burned them, maybe. I don't know what happened with the copies. The good thing, it was in the book fair, in the Mexican stand, they have my book there. It was Mexico. They didn't know that they have the German. They have like 29 copies. And then my editor talked to them. They donated the copies and he gave them the copies to the synagogue. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Incredible.
an extraordinary story. Do you think, we have to end in just a minute or so, but I'm curious, do you think, just to go back to what you were talking about, at the beginning of our talk, when there, someone told you that there were 3 boxes with all this information, do you think those will ever be found?
I hope whatever we say here, stay here. But, I talked to an historian in Cuba, and she said that Fidel Castro, he loved to read and checking. He requested the boxes because he wanted to know more about the St. Louis. he never returned the boxes again to the archive. Then hopefully someday we're going to have access to the real National Archive in, maybe the family keep it or maybe they destroy because they don't care about old yellow paper from 1939, but who knows? But this is part of the legend that, Fidel has all the boxes.
It's so interesting, and thank God there were people like your grandmother who told the story, and all of the research that you were able to do, such an important piece of our history.
But even because when I presented the book right now, I think every place that I go, someone knew about this story. But like 10 years ago, when I presented my project to Simon & Schuster, half of the people there, they're Jewish. They didn't know about the St. Louis. This is a story that and that's the reason that I trying my the three books that right now I'm writing the third one, The German Girl, The Daughter Stell, and The Night Traveler. There are a connection. One of the first ones dedicated to the St. Louis, and the rest of them, there is a simple connection. But for me, it's trying to bring to life part of the history that we tend to forget, and we prefer to forget. But what is the reason that we don't talk about the St. Louis? Because it's easy to say Hitler killed 6 million Jewish, but when you said that part of the tragedy, it was Cuba, Canada, and United States, we prefer to put that on the side. And in the Daughter Stell, I'm trying to bring another part of the history, the one I also playing when they burned down the whole town with over 600 mothers and children inside the church. Okay, it was by the Nazis with the French police. And then we prefer to don't talk about it because this is part of the history and it's painful and we follow orders. It's always following orders.
It's so important, that we talk about this and if we don't, it's been said many times by people, much wiser than I, and how we are doomed to repeat history if we don't learn from it. Armando Lucas Correa, I thank you so much for all the research that you did. The German Girl is such a wonderful book. I encourage everyone to get it and to read it, and just it's a devastating and moving story of these two women at different times, and certainly is set largely on the St. Louis. Armando, thank you so much, and I want to thank everyone so much who came today, and wishing everyone a lot of safety in this very difficult time, and we're so grateful that you chose.
Thank you, Samantha, for having me. Yeah.
Thank you guys. I want to just echo what Jessica said. I encourage all of our viewers to check out Armando's book. It is available for purchase on Amazon. It's been translated into 13 languages, so hopefully you'll be able to find a version that in the language that you know. The museum's virtual public programs are made possible with support from viewers like you guys. So if you enjoyed today's program, please consider making a donation to the museum. The quick link for that is mjhnyc.info/donate, or you can just Google the Museum of Jewish Heritage and visit our website. Thank you guys once again for this incredible program. And for those who are asking, this program was recorded. It will be up on YouTube, hopefully by tomorrow. And we will send out links to all people registered to that YouTube page. And unfortunately, we were unable to stream to Facebook today due to some technical issues, but it will be available on YouTube, and we'll try to upload the video to Facebook as well. So thank you guys once again. This was really phenomenal.
And stay safe. Everybody stay safe, please.
Please.